Casey, how are you?
Great. Thanks, Ryan. Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, I was just saying, I'm so excited for this conversation because I've heard your name come up multiple times in the Vistage circuits, as well as my buddy Jimmy Fritz, thank you, and Kurt Therio, thank you, you've presented to the Allied crew and community quite a few times about pricing. Yeah. And my guess is, just like what I've seen, is your topic is kind of top of mind these days. Like, what should we be doing? And I think it should have always been top of mind, but now I don't think people have the choice but to address it. So why don't you just give us a little bit of your background, kind of the brief bio. I'm going to do a little intro in advance, but then we can unpack all the stuff that you're here to talk about.
Sure. That's great. Yeah. So I run a company called Boost Pricing, and we help organizations discover their true pricing power, operate from a place of confidence, not fear. The reality is that we find that most companies, most sellers, most salespeople, anybody in the selling seat, most of those decisions are made from fear, not confidence. So we're pricing not to lose rather than pricing to win. And so our organization leads training and development programs to help companies improve that. Make courageous price increases, masterful at handling price objections, fearless in communicating value, and making price a very secondary factor. So that's kind of what I do now and the team I run. How I got here, as far as the quick bio, is a bit of a winding road. I don't remember ever a pricing consultant coming in for career day in middle school, right? Like I did not even know this was a career option. I basically thought my choices were fireman, artist, teacher, veterinarian, microbiologist. So this was not a plan. In other words, I didn't set out to be what I am. I'm an engineer by training, and I was in Six Sigma. I was an early Six Sigma black belt for GE the first time I came across pricing. And I love the discipline. I find it to be a fascinating intersection of art and science, people and process, data and psychology. I think that, if you ever read a econ textbook or took an econ class, pricing is presented in this very sort of mathematical kind of clinical fashion. Like there's a supply demand curve. If you charge more, you sell less. If you charge less, you sell more. But the real world's very different than that. It's pricing's mysterious. There's a lot of bluffing. It's more like poker. It's this sort of sexy discipline to make a lot more money. And I agree with one of your opening comments, which is we should have always been focused more on it. But yeah, it's getting a lot more attention these days. Yeah. So that's the short version of how I ended up where I am with pricing.
Oh, that's awesome, Casey. I appreciate that. And just even how you opened that up, if people aren't hooked because of how you describe that, it's like a motivational speech. Like, yes, who doesn't want that? And talk about the intersection. I love how you said the intersection of psychology and data. I mean, I think we don't have to go on this rabbit hole, but like Yellen and Powell have really figured out that it's not just a Bloomberg terminal. There's a bunch of human beings that are not independent agents doing rational things all the time.
Absolutely. And that's fascinating because there's tons of research that is very compelling from the fields of things like behavioral economics and things like that. But, it's based on this assumption of rational behavior, which we know from neurochemistry and psychology that emotions drive our decisions a lot, just as much, if not more than rational factors. And then you add in the kind of totally unforeseen set of circumstances that any model would not do a good job of predicting an outcome on, in the form of a global pandemic, a war in Ukraine causing crazy impact on the energy sector, supply chain interruptions, this insane inflation, and all that happening all at the same time on top of a labor shortage and a war for talent. I think that it's time to step away from. It's like I say this as an Excel lover, and spreadsheets are my jam. I love numbers. I'm an engineer after all, but it's time to close the spreadsheet and go, belly up to the conversation to ask for your value.
I love it so much. And I love it from my career as a salesperson, as a like operational leader, and as an entrepreneur, and also as a consultant helping people with their numbers. Because like you can't engineer human beings into doing things. But like what I find super fascinating, and I want to get into kind of the how and how you've learned all this. But before I do that, is how, like when you're at GE, like what about the pricing hooked you? Because I watch your YouTube videos and stuff like that, and you have a passion for what you do, kind of like what I do. And I'm curious of why do you get so passionate about it? Like, what is it about pricing and what the power of pricing that gets you so excited every day?
Well, that was a bit of a journey. So initially, I think it was just a little bit of the awareness of what I described, which is it's not that simple. It's not as simple as it appears on paper. And I made this very quick allusion to poker, and I'm not a poker player. I've played it a couple times, so it's not my sport, but I'm a student of like life, and I
Mm-hmm.
find the very interesting the success of a poker player. Certainly the cards they're dealt is part of it, but how they play the game is a
Mm-hmm.
huge predictor in their success. And so the reason I like that analogy for pricing is I think it's exactly the same. I think that we are all, whether you're on the buyer seller side of the table, you have your hand to play, right? And I think that both sides are bluffing. Everybody's trying to hide the truth. Sellers are trying to hide how little they're willing to accept. Buyers are trying to hide how much they're willing to pay, and everybody's looking at their cards and trying to judge the strength of their hand. And across decades of specializing in this work, I've seen sellers fold over and over and over again because they buy into the illusion that the buyer has the better hand. And so some of the early interest I got in this area, in this field, was because of just identifying or seeing the dynamic I just
Mm-hmm.
described play out in sales conversation after sales conversation. But why the evolution has been that when we really started, and at the time it was just me. This is before I had a team and I was a solopreneur. When I started really focusing on helping to address the mindset limiters, the self-limiting beliefs, the emotions, the habits, the attitudes of the seller. In other words, what I would call the head trash, the
Yeah.
stuff between their ears. When we address those things by sort of pulling back the curtain on customer tactics and then arming the seller with methods and tools and messaging, but most importantly, the confidence to negotiate from a place of strength and power, not fear, that margins directly rose as a result. Nothing
Mm.
improved about the quality of their products and services or their lead time or their website messaging or anything else. It was strictly the belief that I can.
Mm-hmm.
Henry Ford says, if you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. And I
That's
have
so
seen
true.
that. And I never stop being amazed, mystified, humbled, and gratified to be part of bringing some ideas to people to help them shift their paradigm and their own pricing power. And they walk
Mm-hmm.
out of our work or any other, anybody else that does the kind of work we do. And now they're charging more and customers pay them more. They're not
Yeah.
worth more. They were always worth it. It's sort of like, Dorothy could always go home. She always had the ruby slippers, right? She just
Mm-hmm.
had to go on that journey to discover it. It's the same with
Mm-hmm.
pricing. So
Oh, I love
I
it.
guess if I can add one more thing, I am powerfully
Yeah.
motivated by the mission to help people that are great at what they do get paid like they're great. If you're excellent, if you deliver excellent products and services, then you got to be paid like you're excellent, not like you're good, and certainly not like you're mediocre. And I come across as the sort of stratum of companies I work with or that we work with are, small and medium-sized privately held companies. They're not the Coca-Colas of the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
you're talking about somebody who has, I don't know, 40 employees. And if they're more profitable, now they're paying profit sharing to their employees, or they're able to hire someone. You're talking about real families and communities impacted because you're talking about people's paychecks. It's a very satisfying thing to be part of
Mm-hmm.
planting a couple seeds that transform the profitability of an organization and seeing how that affects the people that work there.
That's so awesome, Casey, because and that makes your answer makes sense because I watch your passion and it's a bigger mission and pricing is how you're doing it. And like, honestly, it's very similar. Like I could switch a couple words. Like with me, it's like, it's the value of the business where like, it's not about trying to make a private equity firm have another, percent of an IRR. It's truly to make it worth it for the entrepreneur who's taking all the risk. And there's so much head trash like you're talking about. It's just ridiculous. And so I want to, maybe we can kind of take this conversation. I was kind of thinking about how to do this is from the buyer's perspective, just real quick, and then talk about from like the salesperson's
Yeah.
perspective, and then maybe from the owner's perspective. And I was thinking of starting with, in one of your videos on your website, you were asked the people in the audience, you were kind of playing the devil's advocate of the seller. I can't remember how you're doing that because it's trying to, what's like kind of shift their mindset of like, hey, the seller you do this too as a seller. I can't remember how you did that.
Yeah. I can summarize that relatively quickly, I think. So I talk about in my keynote speeches, and our team addresses this in our training programs, the idea that it is the human condition to try to hold on to our resources. So in other words, it is every human on the planet wants to save money, conserve their resources so that they can feed themselves and their children, or pay for their employees, or do whatever, right? So the idea that people want as buyers, that buyers want our stuff for less, should not surprise anyone. It's not insulting. It's not hurtful. Nobody's out to get you. Price objections will continue until the end of commerce, because we're human beings, and human beings want to show up and save money. That is the backdrop for the exercise that you've seen in the video that I'm about to describe here, which is customers have developed over the history of humanity a series of buying tactics and negotiating strategies to get our stuff for less. And we start this at birth. I mean, anybody who's ever negotiated with a toddler knows they are master negotiators, right? So getting our way is the human condition. So here they come into this buyer-seller engagement, and they want what we sell. They're going to buy it from someone. Why not from us, right? But we are sure we're looking at our hand and it's got 2s and 3s and they have a full house. We get very afraid, right? But the customer is going to buy, from us. Maybe they've already decided. One of the questions that I ask in that exercise is I say, how many of you would think that there's ever been a case in the history of selling for your company that you've discounted to a customer that's already made up their mind to buy from you? And the hands all go up. And then, what we talk about there is that we have sometimes decided to discount to a customer that already knows that we're the only one that can solve their technical problem or meet their creative vision or can get it done on time, or the other guy's a jerk, or we're already the lowest price, but, can't hurt to ask. So I talk about this as one of very many tactics. Can't hurt to ask club, as I call it, is one of very many tactics our customers use to get our stuff for less. What they're doing in this particular case is just projecting a volume threat where none exists. They say something like, if you match this competitor's price, I'll buy from you. Otherwise, I'm going with them. And that is, to be perfectly blunt, plenty of times not very true, or not true at all. It's a tactic. I won't call it a lie, because I think that
can't hurt to ask, like you said.
Yeah, right. And then I say to everyone in the audience, how many of you have ever done this? Buying something on Facebook Marketplace or a garage sale or a car lot, and all the hands go up. And then I say, how many of you has that ever been an effective tactic? Has it ever worked? All the hands go up. And then I say, how many of you were prepared to make the purchase even if they didn't discount to you? And all the hands go up. And yet we forget this entirely when we're on the seller side. We forget what it's like to be a buyer when we sell. And so I connect the obvious dots at that point, which is your customers do this to you. They do it every day. It happens in every industry, B2B, B2C, B2G, nonprofits, goods, services, $1 deals, $1 billion deals. It happens everywhere because it works, and it costs your customers nothing to do to you. It's right there in the name. Can't hurt to ask. So there's a lot of different tactics, but I think that's one that is universally accessible to our audiences.
I love that place of starting, because it puts us all into a position of we're empathetic because we understand what the other side's doing.
Right.
But then I want to go like as I said, then into the sales or marketing perspective before that. When we get to the operations of the company, I think there's a whole different conversation that I'm excited about. But the salesperson's, like, when I was watching your material, I'm like, holy shit, do I remember this? I mean, before you even start about the head trash, Casey, when I started my career in copier sales, I mean, it was the Jeffrey Gittimore, the Sandler sales, and I've got the mirror up in my cube, like, Ryan, you're a good person. Everybody's going to call you an asshole today, and they're going to pound your face in, and and then you just get the shit kicked out of you for an entire day while you're pretending to smile at yourself because you think you're a worthy human being.
Yeah.
And it's like, but like, even the most confident person has that.
Yeah.
But then you talk about like coming from a space of confidence, which is just this crazy like leap of faith. There's I don't know how else to describe it from my perspective. Then if I pretend that I'm confident and say no, then it actually happens, but I'm scared to absolute death.
Yeah.
Am I on track here? Because how do you?
I mean, for sure. And I think that so there's a lot there. There's because mindset.
Maybe just take the headspace. Yeah, take the headspace.
Yeah. I mean, mindset and our beliefs and our fears and how we show up in sales conversations are incredibly important in predicting our success. And I always say dogs and prospects can smell fear. So In absence of confidence, I am a fan of the kind of the approach you described, which is a little bit of a fake it till you make it. But the work that I'm on this mission to do around the world is to convince people that it's not fake, that there's absolutely a reason for authentic confidence. And a way I would, some of the questions that I would plant in the seeds of any audience, including those listening to this podcast, are: do you solve a real problem for your customers? Do you provide excellence in the form of your products and services? Do you wrap excellence around them? Do you take great care of your customers and their needs? If so, I invite you to consider that you have more power than you think. They're going to buy these products and services from someone. Why not from you? Don't you believe in what you sell? And occasionally, I'll be very honest, I run into someone who does not believe in what they sell, in which case pricing isn't their problem. They have a value issue. They have a quality issue. They have something they have to fix before they can go ask for more. But if you are best in class or better in class, then virtually every company, maybe every company in that space, has some pricing opportunity that is exclusively limited by their own beliefs.
And so when you think about, as a salesperson going in there having that confidence perspective, I find it the challenge when I was a salesperson, or like when I watch other people, the quality thing is absolutely there, right? Like if they're not able to deliver what they're promising, that sucks. There's nothing worse as a salesperson, but I think the opposite, like when you go in with that confidence, how do you? It's the scarcity. I mean, when we were doing our sale, there was a sales consultant we brought in, and like we had 22 sales reps, and it was the MSU, making shit up. If I don't get this sale, then I'm not going to hit my quota. And if I don't hit my quota, then I'm not going to hit my bonus. If I don't hit my bonus, then I'm not going to get my money. And by the way, my kids are going to starve, and then I'm going to be on the street. And all that happens in like 1 second.
100%.
How do you start attacking how to shift that narrative?
Well, I think it's an excellent question. And I will say that I'll start that by teeing up what I see happening in the mind of the seller when a customer comes and says something like, so-and-so down the street do it for this price. If you'll match their price, I'll buy from you. If not, I'm going with them, right? In other words, this thing I said before, which is project a volume threat where none exists. And in the mindset of the buyer, what happens is, this whole thing about, hey, I really want these guys. I know they're the right ones to solve my problem, but it can't hurt to ask, right? What's in the mindset of the seller is, oh, I don't know, 100% of 30 margins better than 0% of 40. And, I'm having kind of a soft month, and my boss is on my butt, and I missed my numbers last month. And we start to kind of catastrophize, as you're kind of describing, and it can go very far into like,
really fast.
I'm homeless begging for nickels on the street, right? I mean, we go very far with that. And one of the exercises that I like a lot, it's available for free on our website, and I can send the link to you after we hang up too, but is a calculator that you can sort of run some what if scenarios. I believe that one of the most powerful ways to dispel fear, and this, by the way, is not just in pricing, but it certainly works in pricing, is to be very, very specific about what you actually think is going to happen, right? To your point, they go from, oh my gosh, this customer's asking for a better deal, to I'm going to be homeless in 1 second. And like I'll tell you a quick story that isn't about pricing on this. When I was thinking of starting my company, I wanted to become an entrepreneur. I had all these reasons to believe I could do it and would be successful. But I was a single mom of 2 little girls, and I was really scared of failure because I'm a single mom of 2 little girls, right? And so I put it off for a long time, and then finally someone asked me that question very specifically. What do you think could happen? Well, I could fail. Okay, and then what would happen? Well, then I would, probably go into a little bit of debt. And then what would happen? And the worst thing that could happen, as it turns out, is I would have to go get another crappy job, which I already had and was trying to quit, right?
So, yeah, right,
so
right.
I think it's a little bit of an effort, and this can be analytical or sort of qualitative, but to bound the risk, bound the fear, and say, if the worst thing happens, what's this really look like? And often that can look like doing some of those profit trade-offs of, if I lose 5% on my volume, but my margins are X% higher. And I think that can give salespeople, sales leader, business owners starch in the back to say, well, we're not going to lose 15% if we ask for 5. So we're going to be slightly smaller, but much more profitable. And I don't believe, by the way, this is really important for me to say, I don't believe it's necessary to lose volume if you hold the line on price or ask for more. I think you can do both things. You can grow margins, grow volume and margins operations at the same time through very surgical and strategic application of good pricing strategy. But in absence of perfection in that regard, it's one of those things like it's just a confidence play to take a look at that math and say, it's like if you're afraid of the monster under the bed and you won't get out of bed because you're afraid of that monster, and I'm like, grab a flashlight, look under there. How sharp are the claws? How big are the teeth? How many warts does it have? If it's not that bad, then that can give you the confidence to proceed.
What you're referring to is actually in clinical psychology is actually exposure therapy. Like it's actually like you
do
actually
it,
like if you're afraid of the elevator, can you look at it?
Yeah.
Like, and then over time you're
touch it? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Eventually you're going to get in, but okay. Well, awesome. Go for it.
Oh yeah. I just have one more point to add to this, which is, this is a point that resonates immediately with sales leaders and business leaders. I know that salespeople get it, but I think that it's not as immediately effective to get over the fear with this particular point. But the reality that salespeople or businesses are considering when they're contemplating either not offering a concession when someone comes along and pushes on them that way, or asking for a price increase or whatever that looks like, they're two alternatives that they are weighing are, I'm here with all this volume and I'm going to lose volume. So there's a risk of loss, and they're evaluating their current position against the risk of loss. And that drives a lot of people not to take action, not to hold the line, not to raise prices. And I would say that you are already living every single day the realized risk of the status quo, which is too low of pricing. So in other words, the measurement of the gap of the difference is the wrong measurement. The fact that you're already, letting, depending on the size of your company, $10,000, $100,000 a month of unrealized profitability, walk out the door and sit in your customer's bank account, you're living that risk.
Yeah.
So I think it makes it a little bit more
What's the first thing to do when you're digging a hole? Stop digging.
Exactly.
And that actually I'm looking at my notes here is like you had mentioned, and like the two things is when and how much. And it's so, as you were describing that, is when you increase the prices and then how much. And it's really interesting with recurring revenue too, because if you pull that forward, if you pulled someone that's got a monthly recurring revenue and you just pulled that forward 3 months, you have so much more. And it's the same thing that goes with the pricing. I thought it was a fantastic way of putting it. And because if you got the mindset chunk, which you addressed, so then there's like, what percentage of this problem do you see correlated to salespeople or the company having no freaking idea what problems they actually solve for the client, and therefore not? So it's a confidence thing on itself, right? Could be one thing, but it's not understanding like what the hell are they actually doing for their clients,
right?
So they can go, stand on that hill and be confident.
Yeah, I think what you're kind of asking is, what role does, clear articulation, clear understanding of, and then articulation of your true value proposition, and how does that influence our ability to ask for price? And the answer is, that's everything, really, because price doesn't depend on anything else but value. And so if we aren't clear on the value that we provide, we will always be underpaid. But a secondary problem, and this is actually, I think, the bigger issue, if we're clear on it but can't communicate it, we will never be paid what we're worth. And why I say that's the bigger issue is it's commonly the case, at least in the size companies that we work with, which are, again, these sort of small and medium-sized companies. They may be founder-led, or, it maybe not. But in any case, there are certainly some people in the senior part of that organization that are ride or die for the brand, right? They get it, they know it, they love it, they breathe it, they can sell it to anybody. It's when you get into the sort of rank and file of the salesperson that how they talk about, how they communicate, how they understand that brand promise and that value proposition can get watered down or inconsistent. And the reason that's so important is it's those folks that are the ones that are the standard bearer for the brand, right? And, in other words, the pricing battle is not won by the generals drawing up the maps in the war room, right? It's won in hand-to-hand combat out there with the customer. So you've got to ensure that both in terms of their ability to truly understand, and then articulate their value proposition, but then, subsequently defend it, handle price objections masterfully, negotiate from a place of strength is really an under focused on arena of business in my experience when they want to get better at pricing. They do something like raise the price or let's think about our strategy, but they're not really arming the troops, so to speak.
Yeah. Where I saw that, and I still see that, is in one of our divisions was managed IT services, and I still work with clients in the managed IT space today. And Casey, there's a bunch of these consultants, Gary Pica and Paul Dipple, and some of these people that are in this space, and they have like this like recipe for price per user and how much per month you're supposed to charge. And honestly, I like, this is 10 years ago. I'm like, well, whatever. Like it's so great you can get that price, but they were. And you know what happened, and how I actually saw what you're describing come into real life the wrong way, actually, was they were saying $150 a user, and then you go get $150 a user. But if you don't do that, which again, because everybody was generally operating out of a place of fear, Casey, is they get it at $75 a user or $100. You can't afford to pay the people that then are supposed to deliver what you want to deliver. So I was like locking in unprofitable, shitty cost structures with my shitty employees. It was like, great, now we have to deliver crappy service because that's what I locked in.
Right.
And so like, I'm curious on the business model and how different business models could be impacted on this, because like, and that's where this topic is, the chicken or the egg is what I wrote down about professional services, because like, you need to go get the extra pricing to pay the people more. But if you don't, it's this vicious cycle downward or upward. And I'm curious just on business models and how you see this concept.
Yes, absolutely. And by the way, what I'm about to say applies for professional services firms, sure, but also SaaS, construction, manufacturing, distribution, everybody who wants to get better at delivering whatever they deliver. There's that chicken or the egg question. And I don't know that I have a perfect answer for it. I would say that my belief is that pricing is the fuel, it's the funding engine for growth, and growth, sustainability, improvement, quality, talent. In other words, one of the big problems as we're making pricing decisions, and especially as we're discounting in the face of pressure, is to fool ourselves into thinking like it's just 1 or 2%. It's just $10,000 to get $1 million deal, right? Or it's just $100 on a $10,000 order. This sounds so small. Or for goodness sakes, $1 or $2 per hour on managed services, right? These very little numbers seduce us into letting it go. But if you look at the impact of that on the bottom line, where I'm going to pick a random number out of the air. If you're a 5%, EBITDA company, then every percent of price lifts a 20% improvement on EBITDA. So you're not robbing 1 or 2 or 5% of your business and your growth and your sustainability and your ability to invest when you underprice. You're robbing 20 or 40 or 100% of your ability to grow and invest and improve in the sustainability. And the way I would put that is revenue is for vanity, profit is for sanity, right? So I believe that if you put 1%, 2%, whatever the number is, some modest percentage of your profitability into improving, and you're asking for more, and then you're improving and you're asking for more, you cannot never improve. You cannot never get better. But the things that the things that can be paid for when we're willing to ask for what we're worth are extraordinary. And I think a ton of companies got caught with this very seriously when inflation went crazy, especially if they're in a heavily labor-based business, whether that be professional services or not, but certainly professional services where you're paying knowledge workers and all of a sudden wage inflation is 40%. Yep. Now, how do you keep up with that? And so I think the ask for more, ask for it faster, get it now. Don't get yourself in the downward spiral. You cannot cost cut your way to profitable growth. The only way to do it is through the top line.
It's so true, because then you can afford to invest in the things that make you like in like all the good things that cost a lot of money, which are the investments, provide the leverage to make more money.
That's right. That's right.
Have you ever heard of the gentleman Tommy Mello? He is the home service expert. I got to get you in touch with him because he's he's in the garage door space. He's scaled his garage door company from 2 trucks to 150 million.
Wow.
In the last 12 years. But the reason I bring him up, Casey, is because when he sits down, he's got this like garage door class where he like has all these garage door owners come in, and the mindset, this goes back to what you're saying, is people like, how could you charge that much for your customers? And then he keeps asking people questions like this, and then he's like, how could you do that to your people? You can't pay your people well enough. They're not making retirement plans. And it was like, he goes, you can watch everybody just go, holy crap, I didn't understand the implications.
Yeah, you're
like
starving
you said,
your business.
Mm-hmm. How are you then, like when you take this pricing and philosophy, when let's say there were actual constraints from cash flow issues or like contribution margin, and we don't have to get into the major technical weeds here, but like when you're looking at like different, like when you're taking the data approach to it, because we covered kind of like the mindset and the abundance versus scarcity, but when you have the data approach, what are some decision trees that you would suggest people think about? Because cash flow is super important, because you got margins, because if people only focus on margin, might not necessarily yield in cash that ability to afford that. So there's certain constraints that might actually be there that might hinder or impact the pricing.
Yeah. It's a very interesting and very common question. And I get this a lot relative to contribution margin. Hey, we have excess capacity. Shouldn't we take on work? All the kind of financial...
Which are just excuses, right? For people to try...
all the financial kind of downstream effects of making various decisions. And I'll keep it very simple. And I'll keep it simple. There are 2 times to ask for more price: when you can and when you must. Now, let me explain a little bit. Okay, because this is the answer to your question, but I want to make it clear why I think this is the answer.
Yeah.
Let's start with the second of those, when you must. If you are not making any money, if you are not profitable, if you do not have sufficient cash, if you are existentially facing a threat to your business, and you can and probably are looking at every angle for that, right? What can I do? It's a triage / emergency, mode for the business. And one lever to pull that should be pulled, and it almost certainly will have a bigger impact than almost anything else you can do. And it's probably easier to pull, versus slashing half your staff or something. Go ask for 5% more. So that's the when you must. Now, this when you must is sort of it's the Hail Mary, right? Because that's if that's the situation you're in, and a Hail Mary doesn't always work. In other words, the customer doesn't necessarily pay it just because you need it, right?
And your confidence is probably not on top when you're, well, and if you're truly faking, you might be faking it.
I said to you before we started the call, desperation makes a powerful motivator. So maybe, maybe, yeah, but so that is the one that I believe is truly rooted in your current financial performance and constraints. And it still doesn't mean you can get it for sure, but that's what you got to do, right? The other one is the far more common and the far more important one to the answer, the question you asked, which is when you can. When you can ask for more has nothing to do with your margins, nothing to do with your cash flow, nothing to do with your capacity, nothing to do with your plans for growth. Your customers don't care if your margins are 2% or 99%. They don't care if you have $2 of cash in the bank or $2 billion in cash in the bank. They care about value. And it is such a common, I would say, in my opinion, it is an error to make pricing decisions based on financial performance, not based on value. The reason it's an error is it almost always leads to underpricing, because we are very satisfied with, 40 margin on this deal is pretty good. Well, 40 is good unless it could be 50. Like, there is not a number where we sort of top out at, and this is very commonly a conversation we get into with sales teams, that it's somehow greedy or gouging, or there's such a thing as too much money, too much margin. I say, look, if they're buying something from you at 80 points of margin, then the value you provide to them is so extraordinary that it's still a hell yes from them, right? Like if the value isn't there, they won't buy it. How do I know none of your customers care about margin? None of them have ever called you up and said, Ryan, this copier is too expensive. What do you have more in the 18% margin range? Right? Like, that's never happened.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, I totally agree.
But we get, whether it be cash flow or margin or contribution margin, gross margin, whatever thing we're looking at is our metric for success. It's often leads us to make decisions that lead us to underprice. And in other words, some version of a cost plus approach that is favors the bottom feeders. The people that
You
aren't as
just
good.
described my whole old industry, Casey. The cost plus, the year we sold, we lost a large deal where someone was 400 grand below our cost. That was like the race to the bottom of the entire industry. Is like, screw this shit. I mean, it was just gross. And like, that's the whole industry. And like, it just, so I'm going to kind of switch over into this random alley here. What do you think about the role that venture capital plays in supply chains? Because I read this article last year about like how VC, because they don't have to care about making the money and actually making profit, how screwed up they've actually made some supply chains. Have you seen that? Well, I'll have to send you the article at a different point. It was about Uber Eats and stuff, Casey, where it was like, hey, this one part of this entire link of this chain does not have to make money, and it screws everything up, which is super fascinating. Just so like I said, more of like a side alleyway. But so when as a business owner coming from the operational perspective, and you're sitting there like from the actual conference room, I know it's all the battles are won on the ground floor, but how do you approach pricing from an overall company perspective, whether it's divisions, service lines? I mean, how do you start thinking about that?
That's a big question. We could talk for an hour or a day or a week on that one question. So I'm going to say a tongue-in-cheek answer that sounds like a joke, but it's not. Just charge more for all of it. And the reason I say that is I have yet to ever, and I've been in this game a couple decades and a half, yet to run into a business ever, no matter how well run, and I've worked with some incredible businesses that didn't have some pricing opportunity, and maybe quite a lot. And so at least in some areas of your business, and probably in most all the areas of the business, there's some pricing power. So, simple, quick, dirty, ugly option is raise everything X%, right? Plenty of people have had a lot of practice at that over the past couple of years. Teams are getting, a little war torn. They've passed along their 5th or 6th or 7th price increase. Their confidence is in the toilet. What I would say is not one business in the world, not one business owner in the world is shocked when one of their vendors calls them up and says the prices are going up again, right? We don't like it, but we are numb to it. And that window will close. So I believe that there still is for most industries, there is still some opportunity to kind of be on that inflationary wave. Now we're staring down the, barrel of a coming recession, and there's some sort of signs of market softening in some sectors already. And so that is going to kind of crash into that inflation. Even as inflation is projected to continue, we're going to start to see pies shrinking, wallets snapping shut, projects going on pause, things like that. So that's going to really affect the demand. When that happens, competitors are going to get desperate because we know people don't always act rationally. And even rationally, some of them are going to conclude that the best thing to do is just to start to grab for scraps of that shrinking pie. And the job of a seasoned and effective business leader, especially in a best in class or better in class position in the market, if you're a premium in any way in your quality or service, is not to jump into that fray in a way that promotes a price war. In other words, don't grab for a falling knife. So some of what I just said, or a lot of what I just said, really relates to kind of our current economic condition and the opportunity that presents to still go grab a little bit more. That is sort of topically relevant right now. The more evergreen answer to what I just, to the question you just asked is the more granular we are in our pricing decision-making, the more money we make. The more one size fits all we are, the less money we make, because our decision making settles around the most price sensitive stuff we sell and the biggest bullies on our customer list. And so the more granular we are, the more money we make. And this includes a price increase strategy, by the way. Somebody says, oh, we just raised our rates by $4 an hour. Well, for every customer that would pay you $4, that you could actually get that through, some other customers would pay you $6, and some would pay you $8, and some would pay you $10. And so a segmented approach to pricing is the answer to, is the simple strategic answer to price gain without volume loss.
It's super fascinating. And I'm curious, like, on the role of the data in this process. And the reason I'm saying that it's coming from my perspective over the last 15 years, Casey, we're like, because sometimes I had actually lacked that confidence, whether it was like as I was starting this business 9 years ago, I actually didn't know what the hell I was doing. So that was one of the main problems. We've already covered the messaging. But then, in my old business, it was more of a commodity, whatever it might be. But what I found useful from my perspective was that the more information I had about why I needed to do something, then I was able to communicate it a little bit easier, and I didn't feel sheepish or whatever. So I kind of leaned on data as like a crutch, but like not on a bad crutch maybe, but like, does that make sense? And I'm curious on like how you see that playing into people's process.
Yeah. So I thought you were going somewhere totally different with that question. So I'm
tell me where you thought I was going. Tell me where you thought I was going.
If you're willing to let me indulge in answering a question you didn't ask, then I'll do that next. But let me start with the one you did ask.
I love it.
Because I was like, I got this one. Okay. So your question really is rooted in when it's time to, whether it be a price increase or being more firm and not discounting or whatever it is, the strength of your position with your customers, at least in your mind and probably in reality, was rooted in some part in being able to justify this with some, third-party information, indices, raw material costs, labor market doing XYZ, that you can kind of point to something that isn't like, I, Ryan, would like to make more money, so please give me more. That made it easier for you and more successful for you to ask it. Is that what you're asking me about?
Yeah, and as you're saying that, I could immediately just, let me see if this is how you'd answer it, is figure out what the hell value you provide, Ryan, and then go justify the value. Who cares about the third party bullshit?
So yes, and
did I answer that? Did I answer that in the Casey fashion? Maybe not the swear word.
Yeah. Well, so I'm a truck driver's daughter. The fact that I haven't dropped an F-bomb yet is pretty. I'm congratulating myself pretty hard right now. So I think that what your self-corrected course there that you just announced is part of the answer to that. But there are times, and I think we've been living through one for sure for the past couple of years, where some element of justifying price, especially because we're having to go to the well over and over again and for very large increases, being able to point to the, independently verified justification for why you have to do this, aka point to the price of steel or whatever, or freight and other things. I think it is appropriate. I don't think it's never okay or never appropriate to kind of lean on the, to use your word, the crutch of cost. I think it is appropriate sometimes. Here's a very important caution. Don't only lean on cost. Don't only lean on what's happening to the cost structure as the justification for value or for a price increase. And I'll tell you why, for two reasons. One is, especially if you're in an industry where costs will go down again, like something related to freight or related to steel or something else. It's not going to happen with labor, but if you're in an industry where prices go back down, you're making yourself very vulnerable to them coming right back immediately and knocking on your door for that money back. The second reason, and this is actually the more important reason, is I think if you tell your customer that the only reason they should pay you more is for the cost of your inputs, you're essentially admitting that there's no value that you provide. You're reducing yourself to a accumulation of inputs as if that's the only reason you're valuable to them. And I think that's a really dangerous message to send. And, a story I tell on that one is Michelangelo was paid 3,000 ducats for the Sistine Chapel, which was like $500,000. None of that had anything to do with the cost of paints and brushes, right? So don't, if you're Michelangelo, it's okay to say, hey, my paint price, is going up. And that means, but also I'm freaking Michelangelo, and I painted the Sistine Chapel. So
yeah, I've been at this for 35 years.
So I think being willing and able to say, here's what's happening with cost. That's part of our, but also in the past year and a half, since the last time, we spoke about price, we've also invested in 4 new customer service reps, and we've upgraded our our point of sale system, and we've done this and this. Basically, talk about how they're experiencing more value than they used to. So awesome. Now I ask the question. Answer the question you didn't.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you got me dying of curiosity.
Well, now I'm a little nervous. Like, what if I built it up too much? It's not even that good.
Go for it.
On the heels of me, you asked that question on the heels of me talking about the importance of being more segmented, right? And getting more granular in our approach, or as I call it, the riches are in the niches. And then you started talking about data, and what I thought you were going to ask, and what I am commonly asked, is what role can data play in helping us make better decisions, especially as it pertains to things like, a segmentation or a price increase. And I'm a big believer in a risk mitigated approach, because I live in the real world. It's easy for me to sit here on my throne and say, thou shalt raise prices. But you and anybody else listening to this has to contend with the real risk of volume loss from a price action. And so I'm a huge fan of the idea of risk mitigated increases rooted in some very simple analytics. And, things like, if you did a Pareto analysis of your customers, and it's always the top, 1, 2, 3, 5% that make up the top 20% of the volume, right? There's our 80-20 rule idea. So, a super simple example, just for purposes of the podcast, is if your bottom, 50% of your customers only make up 5% of your revenue, get bold there, get aggressive there, start there.
It's so crazy, Casey, we have some of our CFOs doing this customer analysis for people, and we got some people, it's so crazy how tried and true that Pareto principle is. Like, we had this one client, two recently, we're like thousands, like 4,000 or 5,000 clients. And it was literally like 800 that are providing 90% of a $30 million company. And then the rest, think how many resources they consume. It's so crazy.
Well, what really fries people about this, once their eyes are open to it, is, what they're typically looking at there is some gross margin, impact from those that 80% of customer count that makes up 7% of your customer volume. It's not just the gross margin. Like, I think at the margin there is such a miss, because you're not looking at all the other costs to serve elements, right? Just even things like generating an invoice, processing the invoice, processing the payment, having someone from AP call them and say, hey, you haven't paid us on time. That setting them up in your customer systems. There's so many things. There's so many touch points with every customer, and so many hidden costs to serve, that frankly, being willing to walk away from the tail, a lot of companies get a lot more profitable. And my counsel is not necessarily walk away from the tail, but let them opt in or out at a very high margin, right? Like, some of them may go, a lot of them will stick around and pay you for the privilege of being tiny. So that is one, one element. The Pareto is one tool, but the idea is to use some simple analytics to steer our efforts. Jim Collins talks about in his book, Bullets Before Cannons, right? So, like, where are the easiest places to take action that present the least risk, that generate the biggest impact? And so I like to kind of rinse my decision-making, or help our clients rinse their decision-making through that lens of, as you map this, what data points to this is low risk, either because it's very, very sticky, or they're tiny and they don't represent a lot of risk individually if a couple of them go, or whatever else. And I think that can be another confidence builder that says we aren't going after the whales right now. We're starting here. We're going to build our confidence that the market will bear this, and then we're going to start to expand out from there.
I love it. I feel like I kind of have an idea how you'd answer this given this conversation already, but product pricing fit when you're launching a new product, or if it's a new company that's trying to test out the marketplace, when there might not be an obvious answer of even like where the pricing should fall in, or maybe even like what value, even if someone wants to value price, what value they might actually be delivering. How do you approach that?
Educated guessing. So yeah, I think that
the bullets, right? That's kind of what
it's not uncommon, right? Either because you're branching into a new marketplace. There's three different kinds of new products or new services that it could be, and you kind of have to understand your starting point of your launch position. It's revolutionary, evolutionary, or me too, right? If you're launching a me too product, or in you're going to be a me too in a new market for you, there's already plenty of data out there about what the market will bear. That's less of the issue. The other one is this is a brand new, totally blue ocean, wildly innovative solution, or it's an improvement on something that already exists. These are often easier to make some good, smart first guesses on, because we can make some estimates on how customers might value our improvements. It's this first one that's really hard. Like, the first car for sale, right? Like, what the heck do you charge for a car, right? You say, well, horses need this much hay. I mean, it's so it's so hard to use data
Right.
to make a decision like that. And so I think that it's inevitably going to be a guess and test game. That said, and I have some blogs I wrote on this very topic, and I'll share the links with you, and you can, I don't know if you do show notes.
Cool.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Great.
We'll put all the links
show notes.
Yep.
But I think that one of the most common mistakes that people make with new products and services is to underprice them, and because they're not sure, and because it's not proven yet, and they do that in this sort of like land and expand model, right? Like we're gonna get out there and start to prove our value.
I have to do this, Casey. For the listeners I'm putting up a book called Free. It's about software as a service and platform software, the future of radical pricing, free.
Yeah.
So Casey, what do you feel about this book?
Yeah, that's a whole nother hour too, man. I got to come back on. So the idea, if we undercharge for it, but we get adoption, then we're going to be in a position to charge appropriately later. And I would say, and there are industries where this is easier and industries where it's harder, but it's always harder than anybody thinks to actually gain price once you've habituated your customer base to it being something down here, right? Some lower number. I believe that for that revolutionary product, that starting out much higher and having some mechanisms by which you can drive adoption and induce trial are much better. And so there's things, education campaigns and, other kinds of things that you can do. You can also do promotional pricing that doesn't cause the same harm as starting out of the gate at too low of a price. So in other words,
ooh, I like that.
I'm making this up. For the first 300 customers that buy this, it's 50% off, right? And if those first 300 sell out in 5 seconds, then guess what? The market is giving you a strong signal that it's super valuable. And aren't you glad you didn't price it half as much? If that's a soft, slow, sluggish start, then guess what? Your promotional price suddenly becomes your permanent price. And now you know where customers value. But you can create some structural pricing designs out of the gate that allow you to say, this is what our stuff costs, and we're willing to sell it here as some kind of promotional effort to induce trial, but it doesn't set the expectation and the entitlement in the customer base that price is low. It's really important how you design that. I
love how you said that. What are your thoughts about like the kind of the shenanigan bullshit that people play of like, this course is $2,000 and you get it for $4.99 or like $4.99
because like right.
Every time I look at that,
it's $900, but today only it's $23. Like, okay, well.
Yeah.
So you use two words that I would think are very appropriate: bullshit and shenanigans, right? In other words, it's a game.
Yeah.
It's a gimmick, and there are lots of companies, businesses, retailers doing it. I call this the Kohl's effect, right? If you've ever been in a Kohl's, like 100% of the items in Kohl's are on sale, right? And I go up and check out, and I look at my receipt and it says you saved $287 at Kohl's today, and you're like, I bought a candle and a tank top, Kohl's. I am on to you, right? In other words, I don't think anybody is fooled by games. I don't think they make anybody feel better. I think they make people feel worse. I think it hurts trust. I think it sends a dangerous message around, kind of slimy behavior. So by and large, my advice, and granted, I'm not saying never do a sale or never do a promotion or never contemplate how to induce people to buy from you by using price as a tool. This can be done, but be cautious about the games you're asking your customers to play. And this is the important bit, what it tells them about your brand. If you want to be the budget brand, the economy brand, the discount brand, I think those games are more common and don't hurt the brand. If you're trying to be a brand where people are like, holy shit, if you want the best, go to those guys. If you're trying to be the Nordstroms or the Tiffany's of your space, don't price like Walmart, So that's what I say about
I think
games.
the word that would, no, and I love it. And I think if I were to take one word out of that entire comment is the trust. because we all know what the hell's going on, right? So you immediately discredit yourself. So you have no confidence to stand on because everybody doesn't believe you anyway. That's, and as we're getting close to the wrap up here, Casey, what I think is super fascinating about this entire concept, and then just kind of like the more macro view of some of the topics we talk about a lot on the show is I have people that I know, clients or people that have been on the show, that they use this philosophy and strategy as they're going and looking at acquisitions, and they're pricing the acquisition, going, look at these people. They haven't raised prices forever. They understand the wiggle room of what that gap is. And actually, Tommy Mello, I mean, this is how he scaled from 2 trucks to 550 employees. He's like, I know in 18 months, that's what he said on the show. And he's like, I know in 18 months, this company will kick out just like this much cash because I know exactly how to price it. And it's just super fascinating because you're not going to, like, this is so detrimental, Casey, because it's not just the profit and the cash flow you're talking about, but it's the actual cash flow and the multiple. Like, this is like exponentially worse when you go to sell, because someone's going to take all of the work that you did and do some of these things and make all the money that you didn't.
100%. 100%. I think, and I'm forgetting the details of the quote, but I think Warren Buffett said something like, if you have a business with pricing power, you've got to give business. If you have to have a prayer session before you ask for a 10% price increase, you have a terrible business. So I might be getting that a little bit wrong, but paraphrased, it's very similar to that. And the reason that I think that's so interesting as it pertains to the space of private equity or venture capital, or, selling your business and what you're able to earn on exit. One of the most important things that buying organizations like a PE firm are looking for is unexercised pricing power, because then they can just come right in, raise the rates, and just print money. And what I would say to a founder or an owner, anybody looking to sell a business at some point in the future, you might as well print it for yourself first, then sell it, and sell it for higher multiples too.
Totally. Exclamation part, underline, all that. And I think we started it as we were wrapping up, but I think a good place to kind of put the bookend is the founder. It's the confidence where I've seen with our clients or myself, my experience is the founder knows the customers a lot of time, which is also the problem, which is also a discount in the value. So that's a whole different topic. But like, the private equity firm goes, oh, this is now my company, and I know none of them. And by the way, here's the price increase, because like they don't have to go to church or whatever and see those people. So it's just a whole different, to prove your point. Like it happens anyways.
Yeah.
So it's very fascinating. So as we're getting close to wrapping up here, Casey, like the first question, is there anything that I'm asking, or is there anything that I'm not asking that I should?
Oh my gosh. I mean, this is my favorite topic, and I could go on like this for days. So I could answer a lot of things, but I think you've asked a lot of great questions, and I've had a lot of fun. So no, nothing specific right now.
So then my question for you would be, is the name of the podcast is Intentional Growth. I've asked now, I think it's like 200 and some people what the word intentional means to them. And I'd love to hear your definition of what intentional means.
Great question. I would say operating from clarity and values.
Ooh, that was good. So succinct. I'm definitely not as succinct as you are. I could definitely take some pointers. The place to find you, your pricing calculator, all the videos, what's the best place?
So our website is www.boostpricing.com, and you can find me on LinkedIn as well. And that's where I'm actually publishing like a lot of my content and my videos and my blogs as well. Casey Brown Boost is my handle on LinkedIn, Casey Brown Boost. So boostpricing.com and Casey Brown Boost.
Casey, this has been a pleasure. I had a blast. That hour went really fast. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
It was a delight. Thanks for having me, Ryan. I appreciate it.